Well, I'm telling you what, don't you miss your Sunday evenings naps? No, we are so thankful that we're able to come back and have our evening worship service. What a great time we had this morning. And we can expect no less tonight. I got some things on my heart that I want to share with you. Current events. Doesn't look very good, does it? We are living in dangerous times. And I'm wondering if perhaps we are living in an age shortly before the coming of Jesus Christ. Did you know the Bible has a plan for all things that God talks about? And one of the things that he's talking about is the events that we're going through right now. I am beginning a series of lessons. There will be 17 in all. And all I'm going to do tonight is to go through each one of the 17 just to name what they are. And that way you can pick out the ones you want to come see and you know when you want to miss. But I'm telling you what, these are all very, very interesting. I hope that I have got all of them, and I hope that I've got in a pretty decent order in the way that they will take place. But we're going to be talking about the events of the end time. As I say, there are going to be 17 of them when I give these to you. If you can think of one other, let me know and I'll add it to it, okay? Now, there will be some that you might say, what about the two witnesses? We're not going to cover that, as a topic, but they will be covered in one of the other statements. But listen to what we're going through. We begin with where we are right now as we begin to place in order the events of the end time. The current age of lawlessness. Now, we are there. Just in the last couple of weeks, we have been able to determine that there are lawless actions in the lives of people. And Jesus taught that in the last days, iniquity will abound. That word iniquity is a word from the Greek language that actually means lawlessness, without law. And we are not only fastly approaching, we are there, and it's getting to be magnified as we continue as days goes on. The second thing that we'll be talking about is the beginning of the 70th week of Daniel's prophecy. In Daniel chapter 9, that is an interesting prophecy. Of course, now all of this pertains to the people of Israel, and we can get from it what we can to encourage us. But he gives a prophecy that contains 70 weeks, or 70 weeks of years, really. And those 70 weeks, all of them have already been fulfilled, with the exception of number 70. From the time of the cutting off of the Messiah, the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, shortly after that, the Lord did not continue his dealings with Israel as a covenant people, but rather he directed his focus and all of his attention upon the New Testament church. But remember, the 70 weeks of Daniel's prophecy, all 70 of them deal with God's dealing with the nation of Israel. So that 70th week will come to pass, just as sure as the first 69 weeks came and went. And they are very precise in the time element. And we're going to see that when we look at lesson 2. But we are swiftly approaching the beginning of the 70th week of Daniel's prophecy. That's the prophecy of 70 weeks. The third lesson will be the revealing of the man of sin. Not too long ago, I preached a sermon on the coming of the man of sin. And I believe that we are on the threshold to him being introduced into the world. But I want you to see that it is the revealing of the man of sin. Daniel's 70th week begins with a covenant established by this man who is referred to as the prince that shall come. He's going to make a covenant with Israel and with those surrounding nations that are all at enmity with one another. And he is going to promote peace. But when he comes on the scene, that begins the clockwork for God's 70th week of the prophecy of Daniel. But then it says somewhere in the middle of that week or that 7-year period, he will break his covenant. He will eventually set himself up. So somewhere within the middle of that final 7-year period, he is going to show his true colors. He is going to be revealed. The word revealed simply means to take the mask off, okay? And we will see what happens when the man of sin is revealed. And I've always got to say this every time we're talking about the man of sin. It is the sin of man that produces the man of sin, okay? The fourth lesson will refer to the second coming of Christ, which includes the resurrection of the dead saved and the rapture of the living saved. Are we that close? I can actually sense the closeness of the coming of Jesus Christ. I look at things going on all around us, and I can find some consolation because I can say that brings us a little bit closer to the coming of Christ. I remember several years ago when Kathy and I went out to the state of Maryland to begin a mission work there. First Baptist Church of Monrovia, Maryland. That's still in existence today and doing well. But I had a part in the organizing of that church. But when it came time for us to leave and we wanted to get back to Arkansas as quickly as possible, we loaded up a U-Haul van or a Ryder van, whichever one it was, and we took off and we drove. How long, Kathy? She said, oh, I know it was a long time. We left early one morning, and through the entire night, we were planning on stopping on the way and spending the night and getting up the next day and finish the trip. But the closer we got to Arkansas, we could go just a little bit further. It's just a little bit further. It's just a little bit further until finally we reached our goal. That's the way I'm feeling right now with reference to the coming of Christ. We're getting just a little bit closer, and God help us to live our lives in such a way as to comment on the real second coming of Christ. Number 5, the lesson will be the sealing of the 144,000 of Israel. Now that's after he takes his people out, okay? There's going to be 144,000 of the nation of Israel that's going to be sealed. What does that mean? Well, the book of Revelation teaches us that there's going to be a group of the Jewish people that will be protected from the events of the Great Tribulation period and from the agony and anger of the man of sin. They will be taken out to a place where they will be hidden for 3.5 years from the wrath of the man of sin or the Antichrist. So that's going to take place. Finally, God is going to prove to the world that he still has Israel in a special place in his heart. He has never lost that, nor will he ever. And so these 144,000 that are going to be sealed or protected from the wrath of the Antichrist or the man of sin, they will be the ones who will be able to stand up for the nation of Israel as a whole and accept Jesus Christ as the Messiah. Nationally, they have not done that even yet. There are some Jewish Christians, you know that as well as I, but nationally, they are still looking for the Messiah's first coming. How surprised are they going to be when they find out it's really his second coming? We focus our attention then on the things that are going on in heaven, wherever we are with Christ. You see, the resurrection and the rapture has already taken place, and now the 144,000 of Israel have been sealed. And in the heavenlies, there is going to be the judgment seat of Christ. That's when all the saved people will stand before Christ in judgment. Not to determine whether or not they're saved, not to determine whether or not they're going to be able to stay there, because that's already been taken care of. The only ones that are raptured and resurrected from the grave are those who have been saved by the marvelous grace of God. But yet their works are going to come into play and they're going to be judged, and that will be the determining factor for their rewards that will be given them, if any. Okay? So we must hurry right along. After the judgment seat of Christ, I think comes the marriage supper of the Lamb, which is the union of Christ with his bride. You'll be surprised who I think the bride is. Who do you think it is? Is that all? In a little bit, we're going to see the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down that has 12 gates and built upon 12 foundations. One of them is the name of the 12 apostles of the Lamb, and the other has the names of the heads of the 12 tribes of Israel. Are the 12 tribes of Israel going to be excluded from the bride of Christ? Not if the holy city, New Jerusalem, is based on it. I believe that the bride of Christ is going to consist not of all the saved, not of all the church, not of all of Israel, but it's going to be those who serve God faithfully in God's appointed manner in the time in which they live. Does that make sense? It does to me. In the time in which they lived or they existed, if they served God according to the terms and laws of God, then I think they'll be included as the bride of Christ. So all of that is going to take place while we are in the heavens with the Lord, wherever that may be. We looked from the ceiling of the 144,000 Jews, skipped to heaven to see the events that are going to be going on there, and then we're going to look back down to earth to see what's going on there. And number 8 has to do with the Great Tribulation period on earth. I don't want to be here when the Great Tribulation period is going on. It's literally going to be like hell on earth. The times are going to be so harsh and savage that it's going to be difficult for people to even survive. Besides that, there's going to be a big battle going on during the Great Tribulation period. When I refer to the Great Tribulation period, I'm referring to the last half of the last 3.5 years of that Daniel's 70th week. That's when things are really going to get bad. That's the pouring out of the vials, the opening of the 7 seals, the sounding of the 7 trumpets, and also there is the sounding of 7 thunders that the book of Revelation is so grievous and harsh that they don't even talk about them. But that's the reason number 9 is a separate entity all of its own. Although it is a part of the Great Tribulation period, the battle of Armageddon is going to come to its fullest. Literally millions and millions and millions of people are going to be killed during this battle. There's going to be blood flowing down a valley just north of the land of Israel up to the depths of bridles, the horses' bridles. You say, is that literal or figurative? Well, I believe it's literal. We had a guide in Israel that says that that's the culmination or combination of all the blood that's been shed in that area. If it was all together at one time, it would be like a river flowing down. But I tell you what, when we look at the events of the Battle of Armageddon and the closing of it, it's going to take an act of God to even stop it. That will be the returning of Jesus Christ with his saints. And I call that number 10, the revelation of Christ is coming back to the earth with his saints. Number 11, after the coming of Christ here back to the earth, now this is the earth as it is now, with all the ravages of war and everything else. The first thing I believe is going to take place is the judgment of nations. This is one of the more difficult of all the end-time events to talk about, because a lot of people do not consider this as a separate judgment at all, but may combine it with the judgment seat of Christ and the other judgment that's coming up a little bit later. But the Bible talks about an actual judgment of nations. And I believe it's going to be a literal judgment of the nations themselves. Because the Bible does speak of the spirit of Egypt as if it was a real living entity. The purpose of this judgment is to mete out on those who have been mistreating the nation of Israel the fury of God. And those nations that have been kind to the nation of Israel, they will be allowed to continue as a nation during the 1,000-year reign of Jesus Christ that's coming up. So I think the judgment of nations is going to be a type of judgment, and God will be the one who will make the determining factor as to which nation will be allowed to exist during the millennial reign of Christ, and which nations will lose their identity. We'll talk about that more when we get there a couple of months down the road. After the judgment of nations, we will talk about the 1,000-year reign of Christ. When we get through talking about that 3.5 years of the Great Tribulation period and all the things that's going to be involved there, and probably take at least 2 different class sessions on that, how are we going to cover 1,000 years in more than one lesson? But I believe that Jesus is literally going to rule on the earth as it is right now for 1,000 years. He has got to prove to the world that the world can be ruled in righteousness even in the presence of sinful men. Now you see, there are going to be sinful people on the earth during the 1,000-year reign of Christ. There are going to be people born and live their lives out and die and But for 1,000 years, Jesus Christ is going to be ruling over all of the earth, of course, with the assistance of people like you and me, who will be designated in different parts of the earth to help carry out the righteous rule of Christ in those areas. And there are certain blessings attributed to those nations that follow the will of God, and there's going to be some curses upon those nations that refuse to do so. But for 1,000 years, the earth is going to be ruled in righteousness, even in the presence of sinful men, men who are still in their flesh. Though we will not be still in our flesh, thank goodness. We will be in our glorified bodies, but we will assist Christ in the righteous rule over all of the earth. The Bible says we are going to reign with him for 1,000 years. If I know what the word R-E-I-G-N means, it means to take part in political activity, to rule and to reign. Here's an interesting, I hate spell check, Ira. But I sent this to Ira to make this slide, and without me noticing it, spell check on my phone changed that to the Battle of Gog and Magog. And I didn't see it until I got through with it, and I have to send him an addendum to it. But a battle is going to take place at the end of the millennial reign of Christ. Well, it's not really going to be a battle, is it, Errol? Not the way we think of it. But there is going to be a whole host of people who, even during the best of times, with Jesus Christ himself ruling and reigning over all of the earth and setting the righteous principles up for people to adhere in all the earth, there are going to be some people who are going to be sick of the reign of Jesus Christ. You see, men in the flesh are prone to reject forced righteousness. And I know how they feel. You ever walk down a sidewalk and see a sign there that says, "Keep off the grass"? I just gotta step on it. Why? Because the flesh wants to resist forced obedience to the rules. But remember now, we are going to be 1,000 years, a 1,000-year period of time. I'm sure at the first part of it, there's going to be rejoicing amongst everybody that's on earth. But as other people are born and other generations come on the scene, each and every one of them gets a little bit further and further away from the principles, the righteous principles of God, until finally they reach a boiling point at the end, and they will do anything to get out from under this oppressed, righteous rule of Christ. And Satan will be loosed out of his prison house, the bottomless pit, and he will quickly gather a multitude of people on the earth to go up against the camp of the saints. And with the words of Christ, they will be consumed. So you see, it's not really a battle at all, but it's mentioned in the Word of God as being a singular, particular event. I can't understand. But you know what? That's the reason we are not going to have to go through the millennial reign of Christ in fleshly, natural bodies. Because I would step on the grass. Then there's coming a second resurrection. The first resurrection is going to be when the saved dead are raised up. And the second resurrection is going to be a resurrection of the rest of the dead. Those who were not included in the first resurrection, their bodies are going to be raised as well. Those who have rejected Christ even during the millennial reign of Christ will be resurrected. They'll be given new bodies, but they will not be like the bodies of the saved when they come out of the grave. They're going to come out of the grave glorified bodies, immortal bodies. I think the bodies of the lost people are going to be quite different than that. They will be bodies that will be subject to all the pain that the lake of fire has to offer, but yet not be consumed. Jesus talked about this during his public ministry when he referred to them as hell as being a place where the fire is not quenched, neither is there worm to escape. A worm-like body for the lost people? I don't know. But maybe he uses that terminology to give us some idea of how defenseless the people are going to be in the midst of all of this torment. Jesus, referring to his death and before his crucifixion, he says, I am a worm and no man. That's when he paid the sin debt for all of humankind. But there is going to be this second resurrection, and those who are involved in it. Remember, this is the time when the death and hell delivers up the dead which are in them, and the seas give up the dead which were in them, and they all come and stand before a great white throne judgment. And they are judged, every man according to their works, and every one of them are going to be cast into the lake of fire where the beast and the false prophet are. That's the great white throne judgment following the second resurrection, or the resurrection of lost humanity. Number 15. Okay. I was getting close to the end. I thought I had left out one. But the establishment of a new heaven and new earth. This old earth, as we know it now, is going to be purged by fire. And there's going to be the establishment of a new heaven and a new earth wherein dwells righteousness. Only righteousness. That's the kind of world I want to live in. So when we talk about spending eternity in heaven, that's really a misnomer. We're going to spend eternity on the new heaven and new earth. Okay? So we're going to be talking about that as we are beginning to wind these lessons down. After the new heaven and new earth has been established, the holy city, New Jerusalem, comes down from God out of heaven to the new earth. The dwelling place for the bride. Because John is shown it by the angel as a bride adorned for her husband. So I think the holy city, New Jerusalem, which comes down from God out of heaven, is the dwelling place and the adorning of the bride of Jesus Christ. And then, of course, comes the eternal age. This is the final act of future end-time events. There can't be anything after that, right? Because it don't get any better than that. Can you imagine for all eternity, never ending, year after year after year, century after century, millennium after millennium? What comes after? Every million years, every gazillion years, we're going to be singing praises to God and always constantly learning more about Him. That's what I think is going to make our eternity great, is because we are going to be continually learning more about who God is and why He does this and why He does that. And we're going to learn to love Him more and more and more and more as time goes on. That's the eternal age. As I say, these are events that I believe will take place in almost perhaps the order that I have them listed. I realize that there's some events going on in the heavenlies while other events are going on the earth, and we have to make the distinction there. But to me, this is the order of events that makes sense to me. And trying to work everything in that God talks about that's going to be involved in the end of time. If you think of something else that I may have left out, you just let me know, and I will give you the time to present that lesson to us, okay? But it's going to be great, and I hope that you will be able to be here for each and every one of these sessions and invite others to come and enjoy it with you. And I look forward to getting started next week on the current age of lawlessness. I'm going to ask you to stand for just a moment.